The second succession war was a disaster for the Inner Sphere. While the first one had already destroyed almost all warships and the complete shipbuilding industry, the second one should affect a far wider array of technologies. Not only military research and production, but civil goods and basic necessities as well. When it ended in 2864, the technological level for most successor states had fallen to the primitive level of the 21st century. Besides starships, advanced computers and most kinds of fusion reactors were also turned into lost tech, while both governments and people alike started to salvage, jury, and recycle, just to maintain the little working equipment they still had left. Little did they know that there was a name pegged to their plight: Raymond Karpov. Raymond Andre Karpov was born on Terra, and he not only survived Conrad Toyama's massive purges of ComStar, but even befriended the presenter Rom, Michelle Dupreas, eventually rising to the rank of Presenter Alpha C, serving on the Order's first circuit. In April 2837, he became the third Primus of ComStar. Karpov's first act was to name Toyama a Saint of the Blessed Order. Since the death of Toyama had been very sudden, and only a short while after naming Karpov his successor, suspicions of foul play immediately started to appear. A threat that the new Primus countered by taking an extremely hardline approach on all political matters. This included the religious and mystical aspects of Blakism that were massively enhanced and widened under his rule. For example, had Toyama encouraged the adepts to include hymns and prayers into the handling of HPG machinery. Karpov made this mandatory. He also expanded the range of items that required such rituals and made the use of incantations more and more complex. Usually this took the form of singing passages from the technical readout like a Gregorian chant, although other kinds of devotional acts were also common. More benign commentators speculate that this measure was an attempt to copy the ability of medieval monasteries to maintain knowledge through ritual. Others think that the purpose was to hide the true working of technology so that even a successful spy of the great houses would not be able to gain useful information. Others just see them as the actions of a fanatical madman. It was also Karpov who replaced the practical grey jumpsuits used since the end of Star League with the bizarre white robes that should shape the look of ComStar like little elves. They were decorated with mathematical symbols, calculations, and formulas lifted right from the same readouts and science books that provided the hymns to appease the machines. To ensure the compliance and full devotion of all members, it also became mandatory to study the theological teaching of Blakism in long, nightly teaching sessions, a subject that also included the discussions of ComStar's mission and its purpose in the Inner Sphere. There was opposition to these changes, of course, yet it was not enough to have any effect. Two members of the First Circuit had even resigned to protest against Karpov's policies, but he just used the opportunity to improve his possession by appointing some of his followers as replacements. More dangerous for him was his falling out with Michelle Dupreas. As the first head of ROM, a disciple of Blake himself, and trusted companion of Toyama, she was almost untouchable. A bad situation for the Primus, who had his own plans for ROM. According to Edict 3056, issued in 2838, the Internal Security Agency was to be enlarged and the scope of its operations widened. Instead of being a shield to protect ComStar and its members against the machinations of the houses, it was to become a sword to actively wreak havoc upon them. This was unacceptable for Dupreas, who truly believed in the role of ComStar as a savior of mankind. To directly attack the successor states would dilute and alter the teachings of Blake. and turned them into an even bigger enemy of knowledge than even the houses themselves. The complete situation turned into an open confrontation in which both sides accused the other of being a heretic and traitor to the true word of Blake. At the end, Michelle Dupreas resigned from ROM and ComStar. She retired to Italy, where she died only 5 days later in a traffic accident. The new head of ROM was Janis Laidlaw, a staunch supporter of Karpov's policies. With his consolidated control, the Primus could start the centerpiece of his plan, Operation Holy Shroud. The horrors of the First and the ongoing Second Secession War had reduced the general level of technical knowledge in the inner sphere. It almost seemed that the word of Blake and the prophecies of Conrad Toyama about the self-inflicted destruction of the great houses would soon be fulfilled. But Raymond Karpov was a suspicious and paranoid man who would leave nothing to chance. For him, even the slight possibility of a technological recovery was a dire threat to ComStar, and proactive actions against it was a necessity. It became even more acute when the great houses started their own projects to decipher and replicate Starlink technologies, a byproduct of their need to maintain every scrap of metal and machinery they could salvage. Karpov used several examples to bring this point across. ROM had intercepted several messages that indicated that the Federated Suns were very close to replicating hyperpulse technology and to build their own HBG stations, a direct attack on ComStar's monopoly on interstellar communication. Meanwhile, the Lyran Commonwealth was making good progress in his attempts to reinvent ferrofibrous armor, a technology that went extinct 20 years ago when all production facilities were destroyed and all engineers killed. If the great houses should regain this knowledge, or any knowledge for that matter, the teachings of Jerome Blake would have been proven wrong, a mortal wound for the Blessed Order of ComStar. So, Karpov ordered Janis Laidlaw to use the new power of ROM against this threat. What followed was a 5-year campaign of espionage, terrorism, and mass murder, all to kill over 300 of the best scientific minds in the inner sphere. In all the successor states, scientists, engineers, researchers, and industrialists were investigated, and the most promising marked for death. The assistants of ROM took great care to not reveal their identity, or even allow suspicions about their true alliance. The murders were usually camouflaged. Especially traffic accidents were a favorite of ROM, with work mishaps and fires following as methods of choice. Sometimes it were not people but installations that were targeted, like a hidden medical research building on the Lyran world of Olympia that was burned to the ground because of a broken Bunsen burner, or Sasso's McGinney's engineering and science lab, when explosion destroyed the complete facility and killed 20 scientists. While the great houses soon recognized that they had far too many coincidences, they failed to deduct the real perpetrator. Instead, they suspected each other to be responsible for the deaths and the sabotage. Operation Holy Shroud was a resounding success. Another problem was technical in nature. ComStar's effort to expand the HBG network had placed increasing strain upon the Terran and the First Circuit, and had drastically slowed transmission times. To alleviate this, Karpov decided to expand the First Circuit to 10 stations. In 2857, Arcturus, Oriente, Altair, and Capella were added, and the presenters joined as well. This expansion fixed the problem and left room for future growth, as well as allowing Karpov to further strengthen his political hold on the First Circuit. He accompanied this change with a further reform of ComStar's internal structure. Many smaller stations had started to change their management structure, usually by adding more layers of management. In some extreme cases, the acolytes were removed 5 layers away from the responsible presenter. In the doctrinal edict of 2861, Karpov clarified important things and gave them an official basis. From now on, the ranks of ComStar would be divided in 3 levels. Acolytes would be the newest members in training, adepts the technicians, while the leading administrators of every world would have the rank Presenter. This structure, as in use since the time of Blake, was now codified and prevented any fragmentation or bloat of the management. He also established regulations to designate a new Primus. The current one would nominate a successor, who then had to be approved by the First Circuit. And finally, he introduced a rotational system. Every member of ComStar would change their position every 2 years. This made it impossible for the personnel to form lasting bonds with the locals and prevent the infiltration or corruption by agents of the great houses. The background for the last point was an incident known as the Vidar affair. Rosemary Vidar, a lying Commonwealth local agent, had successfully infiltrated ComStar. During her 3 years in the Order, she was able to pass important and classified information to her masters. It took one of Rom's intensive sweeps to discover her actions, but she was able to kill herself before she could be interrogated. Primus Karpov responded with increasing Rom's powers even further and ordering harsh surveillance of new acolytes. Everyone interested in joining ComStar was now subject to a deep investigation involving lie detectors, truth serums, and other surveillance technology of a Star League level. Potential spies were rejected or put under extensive observation. As a result of these measures, Rom was able to neutralize over 36 house agents in only the first few years. ComStar's lead in the intelligence game was getting even bigger. By 2864, the great houses had again exhausted themselves and were forced to cease their hostilities in an effort to recover their strength. Again, the danger of a technological recovery loomed over the prophecies of Jerome Blake. When the presenter Rom advised the First Circuit in 2866 that the inner sphere would likely recover all lost technology within 3 decades if the present pace continued, Karpov reacted quickly. Following Conrad Toyama's effort, he would again fan the flames of conflict. To do so, he took a very insidious path. The Draconis Combine was suffering under a so-called shadow war between the internal security forces loyal to Rovina Kurita and those supporting her brother, coordinator Miyogi Kurita. Karpov authorized Rom to filter information about this conflict to the Lyran Commonwealth. When Miyogi learned that the Lyrans knew of a shadow war, he reacted in typical Kurita fashion and ordered an all-out attack along the combined Commonwealth border to hide the shame of this discovery. The Third Succession War had started. He should rage until 3025. The destruction of the continued war was indeed beyond the expectations of Primus Karpov. Yet other problems should again appear. The First Circuit became more hostile to the aggressive policies and projects of the Primus and increased its effort to prevent or at least hinder their execution. Fighting this opposition was a chore that Raymond Karpov was less and less willing to fulfill. By 2875, he had enough. Citing failing health, Karpov stepped down as Primus. The designated replacement was presenter Arcturus Andrea Martin. Her nomination several years earlier had been a compromise to gain support from the opposition. Unlike him, she was a member of the liberal faction in ComStar. Raymond Karpov remained active in the Order, administrating the Blake Medical Center in Europe until his death in 2880. While arguably overshadowed by both Blake and Toyama, much of the religious tappings of the Blessed Order either came into being or were officially formalized during the reign of Raymond Karpov. Future Primus Jin Takami would later canonize him for his efforts in shaping ComStar. To guide man into the destiny foretold by Blake and his blessed saints, to protect man from themselves, to prepare a path for those to follow.